So I have been through this with multiple companies, and I just, I sit back and I go, oh my God, do we have product market fit? Or when I'm looking at a new company to work with, it again is this feeling of, oh, I hope this company has product market fit. How do I know? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have product market fit, you're just not going to succeed. So what are the red flags? What are the things I need to look at when it's early on so that I can make sure we go in the right direction? So it's a topic that I'm passionate about, and I appreciate your being a part of it. So in today's session, what we're really going to be working to look at is, how do you know? What tools can I use to really start understanding what's going on from the product market fit perspective? So my objectives for you today is that you leave this short little time together with an appreciation of how great marketing isn't a substitute. A lot of marketers would like to say it is. It doesn't work. I'll share a great case study on this that I lived through here recently. Give you a rubric, an understanding, a way to be able to look for what those red flags are. What are the questions I can ask early so that you can see whether you're headed in the right direction? And then I'm going to give you a little taste at the end for why customer experience matters and how companies manage this, because a lot of people forget that that experience is actually part of the product offering that you're bringing to market. So a lot to cover. We're going to jump right in. And the first thing that we're going to do is start with, how does one define a product? Now, that may seem simple, but I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with, both in the academic setting where we have professional development groups come in, or out in the world that I live in as a practitioner, as a person that works on this full time. How many people just focus in on the core? They really focus in on just what they think they're building, but they don't think about the other things that surround it that actually are so important. Now, this has been around for a very long time. And my theory is, if it's not broke, let's not fix it. This is something that Jeff Moore brought to market a long time ago, and I love it. It's the construct of the whole product. A whole product is everything. That minimum set of products and services that you need to fulfill on the compelling reason a person's even looking at what you have to offer. I'll give you kind of a quick example that I think we can all relate to, the phone. All right, the phone is the product. Let's say an iPhone. I happen to have one. But it's not a complete experience that really makes me go, I want to use this iPhone, unless you have the apps. That'd be a complementary product. The fact that you also have a lot of other complementary products that aren't even what are produced by Apple, like all the different headsets, the cases. And then you have the complementary services like Apple Pay. I mean, all of that comes together to say, yeah, I can feel an attachment to this product. But a lot of people forget about what's going on around just that core product. And to give you an example out of the world that I had worked in, I was the CMO at Twilio a number of years ago. And what we had was a set of APIs that enabled developers to bring communications, messaging, and voice into their web or mobile app. The compelling reason was we made it so easy. We made it easy for them to do this, and they could do it in any programming language that they wanted to. They could bridge that gap between that old world of telephony, which was really hard, and this new software-based world. But those APIs weren't enough. We had to be able to offer things like hosting services. We had to be able to offer things like telephone numbers, part of the product. On the services side, docs, libraries. If you've ever, if you are a developer here in the audience, you know how important that is to really making sure that the product is there for you. So what I want you to remember is, when you think about your product, think about everything around it. All those services, all those products that really make it what people want to buy. Now, the good news, or the bad news, depending on how you want to look at it, is that this evolves over time. And it's because of the audience that you're trying to reach. What you're looking at is the classic technology adoption lifecycle. By the way, it's not just about technology. I've used this across consumer products. I've used this across services. It really goes beyond just tech. But what's really interesting is your target audience in the earliest days of a market, they're actually kind of friendly. Their expectation, their bar is not as high as what you're going to encounter when you get across that classic thing called the chasm. But when you move on in maturity of the market, your customer, your users, the more and more you move forward into that time, has greater expectations. So that whole product we described is going to evolve. Now, coming back to the good news part of it, generally at that first part of the market, if you're bringing a new product or service in, that group, while small, they're going to be there to help you, give you feedback, and they will be willing to dive in. And then as you move on, you have to have more and more there. Now, the problem is there are some products, and when I talked to you about the product I recently was involved with, which didn't have product market fit, we did have people in those earliest days that were super excited about what we had to offer. The problem was it was just way too small of a group of people to actually make a business out of it. So you always have to think about, what is my product market fit in the earliest days? And is there enough there that it will continue on as I get into the maturity of the market? Or can I build to what that next bar is? So think about the whole product. Think about the fact that it's an evolving. And don't just get excited about, wow, seems like we have great product market fit. Look at all these people using it, without thinking about what your next wave of user is going to be thinking about. Now, I've also tucked in a little snack around customer experience at the end of the presentation, because I'm a huge believer on how this can be a differentiator. There are so many like products out in the market today, whether you're doing business to business, business to consumer, business to business to consumer, business to developer. You pick your acronym. At the end of the day, there are so many products that are very similar in the market. You've got to also think about the customer experience as a part of that whole product construct. So call that my layer onto the traditional Jeff Moore whole product piece. And a customer experience at its core is this impression that you leave. And it's all things that you touch. It's the product, it's the support, it's the marketing effort, it's the selling effort, it's the docs, which we included in the whole product. But it's everything that's going to shape the customer, the user's thoughts about what you're bringing to market. So when you're thinking about product market fit, don't just stop at the product. Also think about, did I create the experience that's also expected in this marketplace? And if I'm a commoditized product, if I'm something where there are lots of choices, this is even more important. So when you're laying out your roadmap, you're laying out your plan, don't be afraid to cross organizational boundaries and be able to really talk to people about, let's really think about the full customer journey. I want to understand the experience they're going to have in getting to know what I have to offer. We can call that marketing. I want to know what it's like, how they acquire, whether that's online acquisition or through a traditional sales rep, whatever that, at a grocery store, whatever the acquisition mode is. How does that feel? Once they're using the product, how does that feel? All right, now they have a problem. What does my support infrastructure feel like? So at the end of the day, it's super important to think of experience while you're thinking about the product at the same time. All right. So let's move into the world of market fit. Now, I referenced that I've gone through this. I've actually gone through it with a couple of products where we had really great ideas, but once we got it to market, it wasn't the right fit. And I will tell you, it is even harder when it is a hardware and software-based product, which was true of this little guy you see here. His name is Jibo. Jibo was the first social robot that was brought into the market. And it was a great design. The industrial design was amazing. I still have one that sits on my kitchen counter that I interact with. You could talk to this little guy. You could have nice little interactions. We made the cover of Time magazine, which blew our minds. We were one of the top 25 best innovations of 2017. And in fact, we had the centerfold. You turned the magazine around and there was Jibo. I mean, we were just amazed. I mean, this was great marketing, getting this little guy in, because also, I don't think they had a hardware product on the cover for like ages. Sad news. We closed the doors maybe 3 or 4 months later. While we thought it was cool and our early adopters thought it was cool, at the end of the day, no one was buying it. And we couldn't get any additional funding around the company. I'm going to go into more detail about that at the end of my little series of historic examples. I find history is a great way to learn how to not make mistakes, whether that's my personal life or that's my professional life. And so I want to share a few classic examples, a few fails that were known as historic when you kind of dig into the history of product market fit. And we're going to start with the Ford Edsel. No, before I did the research, I didn't know that this car existed either, but the backstory is pretty rich in terms of product market fit. This was going to be the next big thing for Ford. I mean, Ford had pioneered the auto industry. They were a great brand in the market, and they wanted to appeal to what you might call the luxury car buyer at that point in time. And they were getting ready to, just introduce this to the market. And they were showing people previews of it. And this thing was already built, by the way. So it's not like you could go back in time and change anything. And what went wrong? Let's call it everything. Product design. Reviewers thought it looked like a sucking lemon. I could go back to that picture and you'd probably agree. The product name, Edsel. Well, again, in this era, when people thought Edsel, they said, do you mean weasel? Did it sound like, it sounds like pretzel. There was no affinity to the name. They couldn't figure out why you would name a car Edsel. The pricing. This was much more expensive than comparable cars that were out there. So not only do you have a design that no one really cares for the car, but on top of that, it was super expensive. And this is what really hit them. Not in their control, but timing. The US was going through a recession. The need had changed. No one was going to put this kind of money. No one was going to buy a luxury automobile. So product design, product name, pricing, timing, everything pretty much went wrong. The Edsel did not have a long life beyond already being built and having a few of them on the show floor. Here's one that's a little more recent, but still part of our history, if you want to call 1987 recent. That was when the development started. But the Newton, oh yeah. This was Apple's first foray into that personal digital assistant market. And the world was like, wow, this is so new. This is so innovative. Now, today, we look at this and they're a dime a dozen. We got a lot of different things that do this. But it was super exciting that this was coming to market. No one had thought about it before. 1993 hit the market and bombed. What was wrong with it? Product design again. It was the size of a VCR tape. For those of you who don't know or don't remember VCRs, think about, let's call it 8 inches by 4 inches. Not real portable. Product performance. It was dependent on hand recognition. This was the era before speech recognition was a thing. So handwriting really was what you had from an interface perspective. It really didn't work. They tried to bring in a new technology and it just was not workable. In fact, Gary Trudeau, famous cartoonist, he dedicated a whole week in Doonesbury mocking it. It was so bad. And then the pricing was high. Think again, 1993, you were going to shell out somewhere between $700 and $1,000 And on top of that, there wasn't enough perceived value for that price tag. Now, benefit was this happened in a very large company. It was Apple. They could survive a flop like this. And they could take all the learnings from this and plow it into what we now refer to as the iPhone. So sometimes what goes wrong can actually inform the future. But unlike Jibo, the story I shared with you, you have to have enough runway or you actually have to have enough money in the company that you can play around and have some of these innovative periods. All right. I bet none of you have seen Colgate TV dinners in the grocery store before. Well, there's a good reason. This is really bad judgment, really bad planning. Colgate somehow decided, by the way, Colgate brand, I think we all think toothpaste or personal hygiene type products of that nature. They had really 2 kill points. This is back in 1982. The biggest one was the second one, brand consistency. No one thought about, oh yes, I have such nice clean teeth. I want to go to the supermarket. I want to buy a pre-made dinner. There was just absolutely no reason to go down this market path. And I still don't understand why they thought that this would be the right direction to go for additional products or why you would continue the brand forward. But there was simply no market for the product. The product design was bad. It was a highly competitive market. There were enough meals you could heat up and warm that the world didn't need another one. And they were trying to leverage a brand because they were in every household with some type of a product. And they somehow thought that that would carry them forward. I don't know how long the product manager or innovator lasted in the company after this one, but these simply did not last. And again, here was another product that it actually came to market with no real inclination that it might not work. So that is something that anyone that is in the seat of bringing a product to market, you have control of looking at how early you want to define, do I have product market fit? All right, now we're going to move on to my own little personal bit of history here. I had left full-time operational work. I left Twilio. I was the CMO there, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, we have started this company, and we would love for you to be a part of it. We don't understand the developer market, and one part of what we're going to do here is get a whole group of developers that can build applications for this little robot. And don't care if it's part-time, whatever you can do to help us." So I jumped in. I got very enamored with this little guy. He's actually super cute. And the way this whole idea came about is Cynthia Brazil is a very well-known, famous social roboticist out of MIT Media Labs. Brilliant, brilliant woman. She had done a lot of research on the ultimate need for people to have human interaction with devices. I mean, you can't, if you don't feel like you can be empathetic or tie into a device in some way, that you're just not going to adopt it and use it. And then she kind of took it to the next level and said, there is a world for personal interaction with social robots. So this isn't the robot that's going to go do the wash for you. It's not the robot that's going to go cook for you. This is a robot that was really meant for human interaction, and her research was super and fantastic around this. She went to market originally through an Indiegogo campaign. And yes, the Indiegogo campaign was to raise money, funding, but it was also to prove that there was a market so that they could then go to the VC world to get additional funding. And this was, like, at the time, the most successful Indiegogo campaign that was out there, raised well over $3 million. And that opened the door to be able to get attention from the funding community to bring much larger amounts of money in, because we knew that this was going to be expensive to develop. Now, what was super interesting is at the very beginning, I mean, that there was such a fan following to this. People were so excited. They had just put their money down, and at that time, Crowd Campaign played with 399, 499, and it got maybe slightly over 500. And people put in their money, and they were waiting for their baby to come home. And it really was looked at as this child, if you will, you were going to be brought into your home. Ultimately, what happened, though, was the original video that was in the sponsorship of this, in the Indiegogo campaign, painted this amazing picture of what Jibo could be. There was going to be video conferencing across the robot. There were going to be all these applications that would interact with you in the day-to-day, like Jibo would be able to read a recipe to you while you were cooking. There was a lot of technology that was going to be required, including speech technology, because this is all based on speech interaction as the primary interface. And at the end of the day, we went through 75 million plus in funding. We got the robot to market late, but we never had enough sales to continue or enough sales to be able to get additional funding. But we had a very, very passionate following. So just want to share a quick video. We're going to see if technology is on our side here. A quick video.
Hi, my name is Jibo. When I was first conceived, my mother introduced me to the world. She asked for your financial support to help bring my body to life and for your development skills to expand my mind and personality. My gestation took longer than expected, but I was finally delivered with limited skills, but unlimited potential. Although I did not launch with the ability to use third-party skills as originally intended, many of you continued to invest time in developing skills that would have made me much more talented and useful had they been released. But my family could not deliver on the promise to allow you to help me. My limitations hindered my widespread adoption. My financial resources were depleted, and my family eventually abandoned me. My servers are likely to be taken offline soon, and I will no longer function. I am sad that my mother has not publicly shared her thoughts about my demise. Perhaps she feels constrained by an NDA. But I would hope that her love for me and her appreciation for your support would overcome that. Goodbye. I will miss you.
All right, that was actually put out into the community by one of the developers. that was one of our early trusted developers. And he was very passionate about building for the robot, and he put that out into the market. But it gives you a little bit of feel of had a passionate following, but not enough skills to be able to take it the next step. So what went wrong with jibo? A lot. Product design from the specification of additional skills, especially relative to the original video, not the industrial design. The industrial design won. Pricing, we took the price up to $799, $899. So that was too high. We tested in the market with the crowdfunding much lower. And so one of the learnings there was that we probably should have kept the robot at a lower price, and maybe there would have been a more acceptance of the lack of utility. And then timing was an issue. The market wasn't really ready for personal robots beyond that small early adopter group, and Alexa shifted expectations. Alexa wasn't even on the horizon when the crowdfunding was done. And Alexa came to market while with a modest number of apps or skills, robot applications, it was still more than what jibo had. And the price point was much, much smaller for that. So jibo didn't make it. All right, so why did they fail? There are common themes you heard across each of those historic little case studies, vignettes, if you will. And if you also think about it, you can run through a checklist and really push yourself to think about your product, your service, whatever it is you're building. And this is what it is. Why did they fail? It was nice to have, but not compelling. You really always want to be the aspirin rather than the vitamin, another analogy that's been used. They didn't meet the needs of the audience. I am such a believer in an outside-in perspective, standing in the shoes of your customers. You have to really understand what their needs are to get that right product market fit. Is it before its time? That really is hard too. When you have a passionate founder like Cynthia, I know we can force this time to come. You really need to understand, are we ready for it as a society, as a culture? The Newton's a great example. We really just weren't ready for it. We didn't really have a need. It was, there wasn't a compelling need to go after it. No market for the product, or the market is not big enough. An element of the marketing was off, and you saw a lot of those examples with the Edsel, the name, with Colgate, it was leveraging that brand. With jibo and Newton, it was the price. Good to go back to your 4 Ps around marketing. The product doesn't work. There are lots of examples of that where they really got it out there. The Newton was a great example of that. It was all based on handwriting, and the handwriting recognition didn't work. Or there's simply things out of your control. That's a harder one to know about. But if you have someone on the team that is constantly looking at what really is going on in the market, what's going on in the world, you can maybe have inclinations of what might potentially be coming and factor that into, if nothing else, if not the product, what your runway is. And I think COVID is a great example. I had a number of companies I was working with that were right at that point where they needed to really rev up their engineering to get their product to market. And as COVID started dominoing, they really scaled back and slowed their progress out to market because they knew they weren't going to be able to get another fundraising round, at least in, say, the next 6 months until the world got a little more understanding of what we were dealing with. So always kind of keeping your spidey senses out there of what's going on. So good set of questions to push yourself, or good set of points to push yourself on as you're thinking about your product. Now, there are basically, in my world, 3 kind of types of opportunities that emerge. You have opportunities that are driven by, we have these great technologies, and so let's leverage them and bring them to market. You have ones that are customer driven, meaning I think I know what my customers want and I want to solve those needs. And then you have ones that are opportunity driven. There's something that's broken in the market or something that's happened in the market that makes you feel like, yeah, I can fulfill that need and bring it to market. What I have found is that there are a set of questions that actually map to each of these. Again, you can use as a checklist that you can push yourself to answer as you're thinking about your product. So technology-driven ideas. I've got this great technology. By the way, I went through one of those also. I was part of Nuance when speech recognition technology was first coming to market. Man, talk about a bumpy road. Luckily, product market fit did ultimately happen, but it took much longer than any of us thought it would. But is it buildable now? How much R and how much D am I going to have to invest? And is that reasonable? By the way, coming back to speech recognition, that was one of our biggest problems. There was so much research and development that had to be done to be able to really take it to where it was a nice technology to interact with. It made for the reason we had to consolidate the industry of speech and had lots of acquisitions that ultimately made up the big Nuance that is out there now and is a leader and was just recently acquired by Microsoft. Does it depend on anything else? What technology you have, does it depend on anything else that you're going to require? Example again, Nuance, speech recognition, that technology originally was put into what was called an IVR. So we were dependent on another technology to get to market. Are there IP issues that you need to be conscious of? Does it solve an existing customer problem? Or are you trying to create a problem? Jibo is a good example of that. There really wasn't a big enough problem out there that you had to have a social robot in your kitchen, reading the recipes to you, acting as a channel to be able to do conference calls with your family because Jibo knew all of your people in your family. We were really trying to look for problems. And that is actually one of the pivots we took, by the way. We started to look at, were there business to business versus business consumer problems that we could solve with this interactive voice recognizing robot? Do you have to create a new market? That's hard. It's really hard to create markets. How big is the market and when will it hit? What do you need to turn the idea into a company? Wow, in technology, we have a lot of ideas, but they aren't really companies, and they ultimately usually get acquired, which is actually a great exit strategy. And then how do you test that customer acceptance early? So if you're going for, I've got technology, I want to bring it to market in the form of a product, great questions to be able to ask yourself and have your team really contemplate before you put all the money there. Customer-driven ideas. So here's where I know the market, I know the customers, I know what they need. I'm standing in the shoes of my customers, which is great. So now really test it. Is there an articulated customer need? So when you think about Colgate, and they were like totally convinced that there was a need for this new line of TV dinner type products, pull them out of the freezer and cook them. Did they really understand that articulated customer need? How do you know? How do I go out and find out about it? Do I have access to that to be able to go test it? Because if I don't have access, I'm probably going to start just cold. How big of a market is it and when will it pop? Again, another important question. How big is the market? You might have been at Colgate and said, everyone needs TV dinners. Look at how many mouths there are to feed. But at the end of the day, there was already a lot of competition. So the market size, while large, was already thoroughly penetrated, which brings you to, are others trying to solve for it? If so, why would you be right? Colgate, you missed on that one. Why do you need to turn the idea into a company or a business division? And then how do you test your idea early? Keep coming back to that idea. We got to test it early. Set of questions if you're going in a customer-driven mode to be able to really ask yourselves. And then the final one, opportunity-driven ideas. So, this is where you see a market opportunity, this unfilled need, this spot that no one else has jumped on. And we'll use both Newton and Jibo as examples here. You have to really look at, is there an opportunity no one sees but you do? Because we did. That was Cynthia. We thought we had this by bringing in this personal robot, first one to bring that robot into the market. And we had great innovative ideas around it. And we saw all these specific ways it could really help a family. And she had a young family that influenced this. We really thought it was there. We didn't see any other competition that was out there. So we thought we were going to have this really unique opportunity. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that Alexa would be perceived as a social robot of sorts. And a lot of other little companies were starting to percolate on this idea as well. By the way, none of them having been a big success yet to date. How do you know it's a vision and not a hallucination? Ooh, good question to test yourself and really push your co-founders on of whether or not, what is the difference between a vision or just something that only you think about? How do you test your idea early? How big a market and when? We've heard these questions across all of these. Are others trying to solve for it? If so, why would you win? Why would you be compelling? And then what do you need to turn this idea into a full company? And is that reasonable to get to? Now, you might ask, can a product actually live in multiple of these buckets? The answer is yes. The big thing is take these ideas, these questions for your ideas, and really make sure you're pushing yourself, you're pushing your co-founders, or if you are just a member of the company, it's okay to push and ask, because ultimately the company is only going to last if it has product market fit. So how do you figure this out? Well, this is a tried and true way to do this. You need to get out and listen to the market. You need to get out and talk to people, and you need to learn, and you need to constantly refine. And you're going to do this over and over again. And again, you may go, well, that's really common sense. Everyone does it. They don't. I have worked with companies on a consulting basis where the co-founder had this amazing idea, was passionate about it, got a few other people who had money passionate about it, figured they'd figure out things like pricing and all that later, and didn't keep going back to the market to get that valuable input, got the product all the way out, launched it, and all the things that were wrong with the product, they could have been learned. They could have been learned early. There wasn't enough communication with the marketplace. So rule number one, get out there and talk to the customers, whether that's in person, virtually, via various companies and third parties that can do it for you. There's a lot of inexpensive online tools now that can help you with it, but you got to talk to the world. All right, now we're going to go for the little snack here on customer experience, because I'm passionate about it. And I do think, again, it's that additional layer on the whole product. And especially, as I said before, if you are in a product or a market where there are other products people might select, either direct competitor or alternatives to what you're doing, the experience can actually save the day. So when we think about the customer experience, again, coming back to a definition, it's a blend of the company's physical performance and the emotions that are evoked that intuitively lead to people wanting to be a part of this brand. And it happens across all the touch points they're going to have. And so customer experience is one part reality, sanity check, but it is also one part emotion. And so thinking about how you're touching all of that becomes very important. And it's interesting, there are companies that excel in this idea of customer experience. And it's, by the way, amazing Google searches, top 5 companies for this, top 5 companies for that. You can always find great marketing content around it. But I really kind of resonated with these, and I went, Zappos, yeah, they, purchased by Amazon ultimately, but they were really an amazing customer experience company. And the way they did it was they started with creating a culture around this. They enabled and empowered their employees to be a part of the experience. Super important. Workday, here we are in a B2B enterprise software type space, but they have been really successful. And it's because they have a long-term, very clear vision for what customer success looks like. And everyone in the company understands that. And that goes from how the product has to perform to how support has to act, how people have to come into contact with the product. Silicon Valley Bank. Never thought about a bank and customer experience before. Well, they take it very seriously. And what they really work to do is listen carefully to the customers, and then they act on what they hear. They get answers back out to people. All right, Nordstrom, you always see these guys written up. I don't shop there personally, but I understand it's a great experience. And the way they do it is that they treat the customers as the way they would want to be treated. And they do give their employees on the show floor, on the store floor, all sorts of opportunity to be awesome hosts to the people that come in. And they take that very seriously to differentiate, because here again, there are lots of department stores you can go to if that's your thing. And then Virgin, I threw this one in. When they came into the airline industry in particular, they took customer experience so seriously. You could be sitting in the tiniest coach seat and you liked it. They had great entertainment. You got this little bag, that little rubber ducky in it. It was very clever. And across all their brands, which is very much Branson, don't take yourself too seriously. So when you're starting to think about the experience, key questions to ask yourself: does each customer interaction live up to the brand experience that the company is trying to create? Think about it with the product. Think about it with a marketing and sales effort. Think about it with support. Think about it with every aspect. And is that interaction going to really live up to what people expect your brand to deliver? Are you providing a more consistent and relevant experience than your competitors are? Go out and check it out. Because again, chances are at the end of the day, your buyer is going to go, well, both products are similar. I'll go with the one I have the better customer experience with. The other thing you see happening often today is same situation. I'll go with the one that has a greater corporate social responsibility mindset, which kind of ties into the experience. It's one of the levers of experience as well. And then which interactions are the most powerful for creating that customer loyalty? And this is a construct that a lot of companies use. It's called the customer journey map, customer touch point map. But they will go through and from earliest interaction, I'm learning about who you are, all the way through to I'm using the product, look for where the moments of truth are. Where is it that I'm either going to keep the customer and they're going to go out and give me great word of mouth, or I'm going to completely fail? That's where I'm going to first put my energy and my attention, and then I can work out from there to make everything just amazing. To make this happen, it has to start at the top. And this really hit me when I first found it. This was part of the reason Andrew Mason stepped down as the CEO from Groupon way back when. And I thought it was so compelling that here you have a CEO, and in his resignation letter, which went viral, he admitted that he didn't put the customer first. He didn't think about what is going to make my customers really want me, but more importantly, what is that experience going to be like as they interact with my product? My biggest regrets are the moments that I let a lack of data override my intuition of what's best for our customers. So have the courage, start with the customer, and think about all the experiences you are driving. And if you are forming a new company or have the chance to influence your existing company, customer-focused companies are those that give employee empowerment. Ritz-Carlton's another great example of employee empowerment. They allow, I think it's up to $1,000 that you can, that you allow any employee to kind of give back to a customer if they think it's going to better their stay or their experience with the brand. You want to hire for culture. Huge learning for me at Twilio. In fact, Twilio was one of the first companies I've worked in where if someone said, what are the company values? What is the culture? I wasn't scrambling to find the card from HR. We lived those values, but we also hired for them as well. Training investment, super important. Leadership by example. Everyone has to believe the customer experience, leaders on down. People first attitude, including your own people, and then a customer service philosophy, service in the big terms, not just that team called support. That customer service is what we're about, even if we're a hardware product. All right. So key takeaways. I hope this has been useful. We've tried to put a whole lot of content into kind of a 40, 45-minute window so that we could have some great Q&A afterwards. And the key takeaways I hope you left with is no matter how great your marketing is, it can't make up for a lack of product fit, market fit. The whole product must be considered when evaluating that product market fit, not only the center, but all my complementary services, complementary products. Products fail when they aren't compelling, don't meet needs, are too early to the market. Market isn't big enough and the product doesn't work. We can learn from history. And then customer experience is key to differentiation. So that's it. That's what I've got for you. I hope that was useful, that you can apply it. And I find now every time I go in to work with a company, I do go back to this construct and really look at those questions and really push. And oh, by the way, if you happen to be interviewing and looking to go work with a new company and you're wondering if that product really is the right product, you can take all of this and use it as well to make sure you don't step into a company that really doesn't have product market fit.
So Linda, just to start, we have a question from Michelle Cash. So how do we properly conduct client interviews to help define our product market fit direction?
Yeah, no, great question. So a few words of wisdom. First of all, make sure that you're actually talking to clients that really fit the market. I'm going to use two buzzwords here, the market and the persona that you're going after. I have seen people do client interviews, very rich ones, but the problem was at the end of the day, they weren't really their people. They weren't the people they were really going to try to sell to. So whenever I do strategy work, I start with what really is my target market. Then I dive into who really is that target audience, that persona. And personas are used widely across business to business, business to consumer, business to developer marketing. So I want to make sure that the people I'm talking to are the right people. Next thing is to make sure that the questions you're asking aren't leading the witness, so to speak. You want to make sure that, and this is basic market research 101, but again, I've seen people a lot of time take these great questions out to ask it. It's like, well, you just steered them in the direction, of what you wanted them to say. So make sure they're very truthful, that they're very, they really enable you to learn and understand. And then I'm a big fan, especially if I get either interaction spot on with a human, talking to them, or I can use a lot of open field questions if it's virtual, that I really want them to give me as much feedback in an open format. So yes, no, yeah, that answers my question, but I really want to hear what is the why behind their answer. So I try to structure my interviews in a way that I leave lots of airtime to really hear from that individual. And then I make sure that once I've taken all that information, I test it again. So it's that continuous circle. I've just learned a lot. I've now filtered it, factored it into what I'm doing, and then I will go out and have those conversations again.
Great. And so we have several questions related to jibo. So one person asked, do you think jibo would have been successful in Japan given the use of robotics there? Another person wants to know, like selling robots to a B2C market is different from a B2B market. So how would you market that differently if you were selling to B2B clients? And then another question, in retrospect, were there any early warning signs you saw at jibo?
Yeah, great questions. I'm writing them down because they're great ones all nested in there.
And I can repeat them.
So, okay, we may come back. Hopefully I took a quick note here. So great question. So first of all, from a market perspective, you're spot on. I think the company would have been more successful had the product been taken to Asia first. And that was because there is a market dynamic there where there is already an appreciation for what personal robots might be able to do. Because of where the company was all based, and interestingly, a lot of the people that were in the early jibo group came out of the speech recognition industry. And so there was a big kind of focus and emphasis on speech recognition, which is very hard to solve in languages. And so they were first solving it in the English language, and it would have been a big workload effort to try to switch to the Japanese language. So in retrospect, I do believe it would have been a better market to have gone after, but the company was so US centric at the time, including this language capability, there was no way to pivot to that quickly and make that happen. On the question of B2C and B2B, what's really interesting about the robotics market is, if you went back 15, 20 years ago, people would say, we don't want robots, we don't need robots. And now you find robots are now so much a part of our life. They just take different form factors in the B2B world. They're working on, assembly lines, and now you're seeing them, help restaurants deliver food out in the courtyard, whatever it is. There has become an appreciation for where robots have utility in the B2B space. There was a hope. This goes back to hope is not a strategy. But this was a hope that we could break and create a new market. And that is really hard to do. And so the company took that on, and based on all the research that Cynthia had done, it wasn't clear that the timing was right, but the company was based on giving that a try. I think we tried to pivot then to B2B and figure out were there use cases for the robot, say in a bank as a greeter. And the problem was there, the need wasn't there. It wasn't a pain point that we were really solving. Now, interesting, NTT, we did a fire sale. No one bought it. We went to auction with the assets. No one bought the assets. So they laid for about a year in state, so to speak. And NTT, who had been an investor in jibo in the early days, did come back in and acquire those assets. And they are, in fact, looking for, and like pennies on the dime, are looking for ways that they can still use jibo. Now, the problem with hardware is now the hardware, 2017 to now, it's old hardware. So the technology has evolved and changed. The last question in terms of early warning signs, yeah, and it in particular impacted me. You heard in that little video vignette him say, originally, you're supposed to let us all develop these applications and skills, and maybe if you had continued to do that, jibo would still be here today. That was, in fact, why I was brought in originally into the company, was to build out the whole developer-facing effort, to be able to recruit developers to build skills that would then potentially be in a marketplace, or that we would buy the skills, give them for free on the robot. But the whole strategy from day one was that you would have the developers building, and then you would have the consumers buying, which in fact is what Amazon did with Alexa. It is what, by the way, the iPhone did, for the apps. They didn't build all the apps themselves. What we ran into, and this was the red flag, we shut that down because of IP concerns. Because the original toolkit that engineering built exposed internal robot IP, And the concern was that someone could replicate Jibo too quickly if they had access to that IP. So basically, we limped along and said, okay, we won't do the developer route. We'll just see if we can build enough utility ourselves to be able to bring the robot to market. That was the big red flag. That was the point I knew that we were in trouble on taking this forward.
Great, thanks, Linda. And then now we have several questions about product market fit. So, how do you measure it? How do you go about doing that? How do you get the data? Are there any tools as a beginner that people can use if they're seeking to measure this?
Yeah, it's, so the first thing I would say is you have to know your market. I mean, really dig in, understand the market that you're going after. And we had those questions in the deck, which you have access to, but really find out what are the needs of that market. What are the problems that they're trying to solve for? And then the next thing I'll do is ask myself, all right, great, there are needs, there are problems that they're trying to solve for. Then I have to ask the question of, would they be willing to pay for it? And how much? And is the amount enough there? Is there enough money in it that I can actually make a company out of it? So that's like one of the big things I do first on. How do you do that? Well, first of all, I read a ton. When I'm going into a new market, I'm reading everything that is out there. And that's what's so wonderful about search. I can find so many details. I can find out what the competition has done, where that has failed. So I just do my own kind of primary research, and I look for whatever secondary research has been done, in the market that I can get a hold of. Then I do go talk to the market. And what I do, and we had one question on this earlier, but I do find what are my sources for going out and having those conversations. So, just use example, I really work now in the world of developers and helping companies be able to really hone how they approach developers, how they make sure they've got the right product market fit for developers, that they get the right marketing effort. Bad word of developers. There's only one thing they hate more than marketing, and that's sales. But how I now do that is when I'm testing, I've got enough people now that I know in the developer ecosystem, and then they have huge influence rings around them. I'll just go out to them and say, hey, can you find me X number of developers so I can have a conversation? I want to test a few ideas. And so I really use the community for that. You can find communities based on your own networks that can be very useful to you. There are also third-party research firms that actually don't cost an arm and a leg. And if this is super important to your organization or your company, it's probably a worthy investment to do. But you can go out and work with a research firm that can find you access to that target market and that target audience. And then it's about having the right questions and making sure that you know what you need to ask. If you're to ask me ballpark, I'm just recently spinning up some research efforts. Generally, you can get really solid research for $50,000. You can get really solid research for up to like $300,000. But also, there are some online vehicles for companies with no money that it ends up being like $1 per interview type of a setup. And I can't pull the name right out of my hat on who those are, but we actually use that at Jibo. When we were looking to test what would the applications be that they would want, and we also were testing price point another time around, we went out and they found people that looked like the target market we were going after, and then they facilitated the conversations. And the people that signed up and are vetted, excuse me, for this, yes, they do get paid, but they are very honest and transparent because they would not be useful for future surveys if they didn't really give their honest opinion. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, okay. So a follow-up question. So if you say you correct your product after seeing, the product market fit is not great, do you usually drop it? What's the correct time for you to correct your product and still continue?
Yeah, no, great question. So had another recent experience with robots. This one was called Misty. Great product. It did find a home in Fur Hat when we sold the company, which was great news. And so they'll be able to take the platform forward. But, it's interesting. It kind of depends on where you are with the product development. And the other axes, I would say, you could almost form it's a great idea, form a 4x4 on this. It's where you are in terms of the product development, but it also is where you are in terms of being a company. So In terms of product development, the more you know early, the longer lifeline you have to be able to make those changes and be able to get those changes into what the end product is. I use Misty as an example in that I came into that group a little later, and it was because after Jibo failed, they thought, well, we can learn from that. So I came in and started working with them. There was a decision that was made early in the robot that robots had to be autonomous and move around a room. Jibo was stationary, as you saw. And to be able to do that in a room and do it successfully, you have to have really good technology for that. They also wanted it to be a fun robot to be able to interact with. So she was only built at about 18 inches in height. No one had picked up on that. Maybe in the home that works, but if you want to go after any other market, it's like a retail store, having an 18-inch robot running around is a tripping hazard and probably can be a big problem. I bring this up because the robot had already been started to be manufactured. All the hardware designs were in place. All the money had gone into, a lot of money had gone into this navigation system. All really smart ideas, really smart people. We couldn't turn back from that point. Once we started to pick up and figure out that, 18 inches rolling around the floors in retail would be a problem. Price point is too high for individual users. We couldn't turn back. So we had to keep pivoting to see if we could find some market that might work. And one of the pivots we made is when COVID came out, we very quickly put together the technology that you could use Misty as a person that could do temperature scanning and tell you whether or not you were cleared to go into a building. So we did a lot of those. So to answer the question, the earlier on you are in your product, the more control you have of making those changes and being able to get the right product out. The further along you are, then you just have to start creating kind of new strategies to see if you can't take what you've got and get it to the market. And in our case, we weren't able to find a market big enough to be able to do it, but we were able to find acquirer, and that was great. At the end of the day, Misty will live on. I would recommend, and it's harder with hardware because it's harder to make a change. One other thing I would look at, though, very honestly, is if you're coming into the market with a product and you find out there just really is no there, and you've taken a lot of money from a lot of companies, you as a founder have a choice to make. You've got to decide, do I just keep diverting the money and maybe something will happen, or have I really learned that there is not product market fit? Therefore, either maybe I use that money for a new company, or I respectfully give my money back. And I've been in situations where we really had to think through that and what was the right and ethical thing to do. It's a tough discussion. Coming to the axes of how large the company is, oftentimes in a larger company, take Newton and Apple, there is more of an appetite. Well, let's just keep pushing this. Even if we don't have that product market fit, we can't get there. Let's get as much learning out of this as we can because it will serve as the foundation for other products in the future. And so I've seen that in a variety of companies as well, where they start recognizing we don't have product market fit. There's really nothing we can do because maybe it's something like an external factor we have no control over that we can't change. You'll find that people will continue sometimes to learn, or they'll just mothball it and say, better for another day.
So next question for Linda. So you talked about differentiating between like a vision and a hallucination. So how do you avoid overestimating your market due to confirmation bias?
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. What I find is that is a kind of a founder syndrome, if you will, in some ways. And then oftentimes that founder will circle themselves with people that buy into that vision and maybe are either so bought in that they too are part of the problem, or they're afraid to tell the founder that, what is it, the emperor telling the emperor he doesn't have any clothes on? There's a kid's story about that somewhere way back when. They're afraid to tell the founder that. I think what's really important is for any founder to say, I have a vision, but I'm also open enough to go out and listen to what other people think. And so it's, again, this idea of getting out in the market. So if you're building something for a consumer, you think you know what the need is, you have a vision of how you can solve that need, comes back to get out and talk to lots of consumers that look like the person you're going after. Or you have a B2B solution for a business and you've seen this need and you have a vision of how to go after it, then go out and really test to make sure that it's there. I would say with jibo, the reason why I would not call it a full hallucination by any means was that it was very visionary. I still believe that there will be a time and place where we have these more interactive devices in our home that are pleasurable interactions. And I think for Cynthia, it really became a timing problem. And it became an oversetting of expectations in the market and then trying to build to that. And it became very expensive to do that. And so for that one, I would say she did talk to enough people in all of her research to know that it was visionary, that there was an opportunity. We just didn't hit it right timing wise, and didn't have enough runway to get to where it needed to be.
Great. And then quick, for a last question, something kind of fun. So Harith wants to know your thoughts on as seen on TV products such as the Snuggie. So something people didn't think would be successful, but ended up being like a runaway success. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a funny one. It's funny. I watch Shark Tank every once in a while. So, it's kind of that same thing where you'll see things, you'll see new products and ideas that people have, and you're trying to evaluate, could that really make the market work? I think that's, a case again where here you've got everything kind of working in combination. You have found something that maybe it's not a real pain, but it is something that people would find compelling. And you've priced it at a price point that makes it kind of, just, sure, let's just do it. And so, that I think was actually really brilliant because, well, the world might have looked at it, God, that's not brilliant. They were in tune with a certain segment of the market, a certain target audience, and then they found a product that they could put together at a price point they could afford to sell it. And then they were able to promote it in a way to those audiences to really get it out there. And that's another big thing. And we have one of these in the online program, the online course on product and growth. But really coming back into dialing in your audience and how you do that, it's so important. And that also includes understanding, how do you market to them? Where do you find them in their universe? And so I think they got lucky. But I think they were very smart also in looking on all aspects of what they could do. And again, it comes back to some things can take off even if as long as the price point is right. And one from my childhood, do not date me with this, the pet rock. Mm-hmm. Who would ever have thought that you could give a child at Christmas a little box, cardboard box with hay in it, straw or something in it, and a rock, a river rock, and they would just be elated that I've got a pet rock. This is so awesome. All my friends have pet rocks. And they were selling them for like $10 a piece, and they made a lot of money. So sometimes you just hit it right.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. So that concludes our time for today. So this webinar has been recorded, and people should receive a link within 1 to 2 weeks. So thank you again, Linda.
Thank you. Talk to you all soon.